Our children do not know, and when I say our children, I mean our white children and our black children, do not know the dimensions of racism. They do not know the consequences of slavery. They do not know the special circumstances that attended the black presence in America. And therefore, it's not easy for them or for the rest of us to understand why black folks in some ways have a special claim on the attention of American society.
You do not disturb the deceased. You leave our people alone. You let them rest in peace. And if these reasonable and just demands are not met, then at the very least, we should do everything that we can to stop the construction of this building.
In the little village in Arkansas in which I grew up, there is a black burial ground, and it was in existence during slavery. I never thought that something would emerge in New York City.
Good everything. Hi. Good morning.
Good everything. Good everything. How are you this morning, this afternoon, this evening, wherever folks are in the world?
Feeling a little like I need to catch up. You know,
Yeah.
I had an author on. He wrote a children's book about Fela Kuti. You know, reading Howard French. You know, the picture starts to be really clear of how misinformed people are. You know, Fela trying to tell the Nigerians what was up, and then they label him a terrorist and, you know, make him a public enemy. And the gentleman that was that pushed the writing of the book said, you know, his parents never wanted him to play Fela Kuti's music because, you know, he was a horrible person and all of this stuff. And this is the kind of ways in which he was indoctrinated by his parents. And, you know, they were very staunch Christians. And I mean, it's just weird, you know, how a whole entire continent, and then here, you know, I've been thinking a lot about the infiltration. You know, I was talking about the photographer who was also an FBI informant. I was like, why didn't I know this? You know,
Ernest Withers?
Ernest Withers, you know.
Yeah,
And
that's how his grandson Howard.
And then I'm thinking about, you know, the informant, you know, that might have had a suitcase and the recording, trying to get some information on Assata Shakur. And I'm like, and I get it, you know, the money, the Van Jones, 100 million, like the money, you know, it makes you
Dave Chappelle, Riyadh. You got to go up there, go to the Saudis. Saudis writing you that check, baby. I think your truth telling days are over, young man. But hey, we'll see.
Yeah, I mean, is it?
Money
And it's that easy.
good.
You know, I don't ask the question, is it that easy? Because it's that easy. Because
it is that easy.
Very few of us, you know, and we're talking about it because, you know, well,
I got used to better. Isn't that the excuse?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's just it troubles me. At the same time, we're here every Saturday. At the same time, there's thousands of people here every Saturday. So I'm hopeful, and I'm hopeful because most of us just don't know. You know, I asked you a question before we went to break, and I'm glad you started. I want to know why we started with this, but you know, there's the Nobel Prize got delivered, and the woman that received it is from Venezuela, and she was all of this. I pledge allegiance to Trump and all this stuff, and I was confused because I was like, she was a rebel, right, in exile, but then she's like pledging fealty to Trump. I said, is she playing a game to keep her people safe? I was so confused. I'm so confused by this time that we're in. It's just really.
Yeah, she's Maria Corina Machado is part of that. If she had been there in 1959 in Cuba, she would have been part of those people who fled to Miami, who consistently vote Republican, who consider Che Guevara and Castro class traitors. Yeah, she's part of that crew. For the last 20 years, over 20 years, she's been a leader of the opposition, propped up by Western news entertainment media against first Hugo Chavez and then Nicolas Maduro. And this isn't an endorsement of all of Maduro's policies, after all, because thuggery can take place all the way across the ideological spectrum, but she is firmly ensconced in the kind of veneer of fighting for democracy. And she is absolutely right in terms of everyone should be able to participate in political process, and that should be supported. But she has called for the invasion of her country by the United States. She's the kind who would get ushered into the White House and talk to fellow kind of race class compradors like little Marco Rubio. She's in that valence. So it didn't surprise me at all that after she won the Nobel Peace Prize, she released a statement where she said she praised the United States for supporting them and the Trump administration. Now, of course, that doesn't mean that that Donald Trump, as he talked about yesterday, near sunset, and we see his regular now sundowning press conferences. What was it? What was her name? Levitt said that he was going to Walter Reed yesterday to see soldiers and also do his annual checkup, except it's only been about 5 or 6 months since his last annual checkup. So I'm not sure that maybe there's some dementia involved. Whatever it is, it's clear he's detached from reality. I don't know whether, in other words, she called him to say that, but she did release a statement where she, and that's consistent with that kind of, you need to do something about this oppressive regime, this dictatorship. And then if you listen long enough, then come the other words, communism. Then come the other words. Same kind of thing, except Bolsonaro in Brazil caught the Carr. He became the president, and then the fascism cracks down. Milei in Argentina caught the Carr. So then now you got the crackdown. So when the fascists are not in power, they're being oppressed. The question would be if Machado had won, if Machado had won the election, she ran, and the press, the news media would say that the election in Venezuela, the last presidential election, was rigged. Maduro rigged it.
Okay.
I have no doubt. And she ran for president, but then they disqualified her. So then she put up another candidate who lost, and they said that Maduro cheated. I have no doubt that the state put its thumb on the scale in Venezuela, but I'm also have no doubt that, as John Henry Clark said, in some stories, it ain't no good guys. And Machado is not with the angels all the way down. No. So anyway, that's the kind of backstory.
In absence of real media, is so difficult for someone like me who was media astute, who has media sensibilities. I'm even getting duped by these deep fakes and AIs, and now, one of my team is like, you got to see, there's a little code on each video to tell you. And I was like, why didn't I see that?
Really?
Yeah. I was like,
What?
it's right there in the corner. It's right there. And I was like, I didn't know, and it's so frustrating. Like, I didn't know. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. But you said something else too with this before we went live, as we were talking about that. So no, you can't necessarily trust it. But after we started talking about how this person shows up in the world and what that's a proxy for, you then made the very astute observation that the Nobel Committee probably that was a fop to Trump. Don't you think? I mean, you said that.
Yeah, no,
I give it to her. You know what I mean?
Once you gave me the information, which is why knowledge is power, which is why information is important. Once you gave me the information, but I had to ask the question too. Like, what am I watching? Because most of us don't even know what to ask, because the question is just as important. The question is just as important as the answer. You got to be able to ask the right questions, right? Once I asked you the question, you gave me the information. I was like, oh, okay. So this was a way of giving Trump a Nobel Prize without giving it to him. This was a way to get him maybe to shut the F up about not receiving something you don't deserve. But we're in some dangerous times. So I guess, you asked me how I'm doing, and I'm like, I'm very concerned because, again, I'm media astute. Like, I know how to find information. God help the rest of us who aren't, trained journalists or, who just are trying to read. And I ask you before I do just about anything, what do you think about it? Because you read more than anybody I know, so I know at least in your brain functions, and you're not teacher.
Just reading.
You're not just reading, you're not just digesting words, you're processing, because this is the other domino effect, right? When you read this, that, and the other thing, the picture becomes clear, right? So you're not just reading all romance novels or reading only just political, nonfiction. You're reading everything, so the pictures start to come together. Like, there was I was doing this acronym thing yesterday, and the story of the taser comes out of a novel. This Thomas A. Swift's electric rifle taser,
My
and I was like,
God.
wow. And then the story of how that, and then his depiction of Africans, and I was like,
Tom
wow,
Swift. Tom Swift. Then,
wow.
as a kid, Tom Swift was a little before our time, but it overlapped, kind of like Nancy Drew and the Hardy Boys. But they come a little later. Did you encounter Tom Swift as a kid?
No, I mean, I was a Pippi Longstocking. I was
It's kind of that genre.
yeah.
Yeah.
I didn't do Nancy Drew. My
Okay.
first book was, so that I didn't care about all of that. Robinson Crusoe and all. Like I liked adventures, but then it got turned dark because I found Stephen King, and
Oh,
yeah,
that was severe.
yeah, it was Richard Bachman. So I'm reading Thinner and all of this stuff. And The
Thinner.
Stand. I'm reading The Stand at a young age, which scared the hell out of me, and I still kind of hold that. Yeah. But
Yeah, no, that's Swift is in the kind of Swift comes between like Jules Verne and H.G. Wells
okay,
and the Hardy Boys, so kind of like the 40s and 50s. I only remember because you know we both, and many of us in these rooms is today, came through that desegregated education. And even if it weren't desegregated, we all got the same books, whether you were in a black classroom or not. So that children's fiction that Hardy Boys and Nancy Drew that we saw on the school libraries or saw at their annual book fairs led to, when we were in the thrift stores as children, spending our little grass cutting money or whatever. And you could see then the books, you would see the Tom Swift books. What I remember is like a yellow book with red lettering if the dust jacket was gone, and you might get it for a quarter or 15 cent or 50 cent at the most. And so if you were reading Hardy Boys, you said, what is this? Because it was a series. Tom Swift had a lot of it, but the connection you just made brought that into the living, beating, pulsing now, the streets of Chicago and Portland. To say Taser came from that, this is, like you said, community. This is what we doing. We building community. Now people are like, damn, I didn't. Yeah. And now something we don't know. And then you start talking, and now we got to connect it.
But it's more concerning now because, I don't know how people, if you're not doing that, right? Because you read something and you think because it feeds something in you that you felt already. But then something else over here tells you something else. Even when I'm interviewing someone, like I had a lady on last week who was saying some things that I know are true. But then over here, it's like, you're crazy. So how do we suss through? You're absolutely crazy, but you just said a truth. I know that's a truth because I've studied that. But do I throw you out? No, let me keep trying to fish through your madness to find something. Or do I just leave you over there to be crazy? And then like, how do we do that? And am I exposing you because I can, or do I, beat you up? Like, there's like all of this. Woo, there's too much work.
Where have you come down on that?
Well, I test things out because that's, I'm also a little bit of a quasi scientist. So I said, let me see what would happen if I just let this woman talk, which I do a lot, by the way. And then some things I just challenge. And when I challenge, it's because it's harmful to us. So there's a method to why I may go hard in the paint, because I say what you're about to say could infect people in a way that they don't deserve if they're tuning into the radio. Now, in my personal life, I can sit and talk with you all day, but I'm not going to let certain things go out over the airwaves unless I'm trying to illustrate something, which is what I was doing. So I was like, okay, let's hear her out, because she's saying some things about the monetary system and capitalism but now over here, she's a cold-blooded, and she doesn't know it. She thinks she's a nice lady, but she's an absolute racist. So it's like, okay, all right. She doesn't consider us, even though she says she does. That's a lie. That's a lie. That's a lie. Because people gonna lie to your face, which is also strange. With a straight face, And maybe they don't know they're lying. Maybe they really believe the lies that they're telling, but it's an absolute lie. So, you know, I have to wade through that too. But it's a difficult time that we're in. And I guess that's where I'm landing, because it's not enough of us who know enough. And that's why community is important. That's why this is important for me. It's important for me, you know. And so it has to be important. If it's not important for you, okay. But this is important for me because there's so much. It's a fire hose of information that we have access to. But the curation of that is so important. And it's not about having people just agree. It's about understanding the times that we're in. So you codified for me what just happened with the Nobel Prize, because I was confused. I'm like, the lady, media's telling me she's a rebel and she's, you know, she's been in exile. This woman's a freedom fighter. I was like, okay, because that's what the media, the whole media. And she got the Peace Prize after these people said they would not give it to him. Now she's praising Trump. I'm confused. What is happening? Is she playing a game to keep her people safe? Because people do that, you know. We're right here. You done shot up a whole couple of boats of innocent people talking about cartel, and they were not cartel. Now they're dead. They have family. You know, people lost their parents and their siblings and their loved ones because this administration labeled people something that they're not. Now they're out here calling everybody Antifa, or they call it Antifa, anti-fascists. Everybody now is the Red Scare all over again. Who do you believe? How do you fight all of this misinformation? And then we are now on the radio talking to people every day, and we have to be responsible. And so I feel a deep sense of responsibility when I open my mouth to tell the truth, to make sure it's right. Sometimes you're going to make a mistake like I did yesterday, and then you get the proper information. Because I was like, well, she's a freedom fighter, because I'm reading the story. I was like,
Well, I mean,
right here.
that's where our framework comes in always handy. Anytime anything comes from the commercial news entertainment media, I just go straight to the social structure. Who are we to other people, and what's the context? I don't trust anything any platform, any broadcast platform says, and these newspapers I subscribe to are absolutely untrustworthy. So the only question becomes how I'm gonna read between. Well, we do the same thing. I mean, I just want to ask you, and you're right. I mean, is the question of truth or falsehood, whether it's factually correct or incorrect, is that the standard? Because as you say, I mean, you got a guy, this guy who was at Rutgers, expert on Antifa, who wrote that Antifa handbook, and I got that book somewhere around here. Mark Bray, he and his wife, who was a professor at Rutgers, you know, as you know, and some people here may not know, they left the country. They flew out of Newark. Well, they tried to fly out of Newark International one day this week and were told that their reservations were canceled. And so they had to rebook, but they got out because somebody called up to Rutgers and was like, yeah, I'm coming into class and kill you in front of your students. Because he wrote a book on Antifa. He's an expert on Antifa. So Bray was like, he and his wife and children are in Spain right now. He wrote a book on Spain and fascism some years ago, but I'm saying that to say that Rutgers now say, oh yeah, y'all can teach remotely. But I'm saying that's not the solution. The solution is not armed guards either. The solution is reaching into the brain of whatever demented clown called up there and either putting his ass in jail or reconstructing his whole life, because he's a battery, and whoever that guy's back is was placed there by disinformation. But that's what I'm asking you. So if a thing is true or not true, or factually accurate is probably a better way of saying that, not true or false, because sometimes perspective can come in. Is that the standard in a world where disinformation can make you president of the United States? I don't know. I'm asking. You know what I'm saying? Because we're fighting a battle, but I'm not sure what the coordinates are. You know what I'm saying?
For a long time, I haven't reconciled with this, but I know this, that we are probably buried under quicksand, trying to find a hole to breathe, poke our heads through. And I'm so stubborn that I can't, I'm not giving up. You know, I'm like, I just can't give up. But it does feel like I look around, I'm like, I don't know how we get through this. And especially now with the technology and our children. And the only thing to me that keeps me going is every day there's a call Every day there's an email. Every day there's a message somewhere that says, I just found this. Why didn't I know about this? And my whole perspective has changed. And it's really in the question asking that we do. You know, it's the information that you deliver, but it's the questions that rise in people's spirits. Like, is this right? Well, like, why? You know, the why of it all, you know, and once you start searching for the why, things start to become a little clearer. But
Yes.
this is the most willful misinformation I've ever experienced in my entire life. And I don't know if I were in the classroom right now, how I would be teaching. It would be so difficult. And it's only been less than 2 years. No, I mean, I would have to completely scrap everything that I've ever taught about journalism and just sit with these children and talk about critical thinking, and just inundate them with like waking up their little brains, because you know, it was clear to me maybe 15 years ago that the teaching to regurgitation method, to take tests, to have scores, to get money, has almost deadened our children's ability to think critically through, you know, the books that you and I read as children that never showed any of our visages or culture or whatever. We were able to figure out how to enjoy, you know, these stories and still maintain our sense of self. And, you know, and I know that very, very clearly, because I know I wasn't Pippi Longstocking, but I was able to go on a journey and still be Karen at the end of it, and see Karen in those boats with the, you know, with carefree out there, you know, sailing the seas and stuff. I don't know. I don't know about today. And so, you know, I often think about how important it is for us. And it's not just about reading a book, because people read, people, especially people here, we're talking to people who do read. But if you haven't read and then discussed and then challenged and then processed and then come out and question yourself, and then, you know, like it's a whole journey that you have to be on, and you've done that in a lifetime, and you cannot make it up. And that's the other thing. People try to, if I could just read as much as I can. No, this is about reading, thinking, processing, comprehending, and living. Like it's a whole thing that you just can't do in 1 week or 1 year. You took off the whole year and read everything, you still would not know enough to be able to guide yourself through this time. So,
and we'll die not knowing enough individually, but collectively, like the time can be reframed. Exactly what you said. I mean, while we are talking here, and I mean, first of all, this is the classroom. We know that that concept of the university has been jailbroken. This is a classroom. This is a metronome of class, and we're all in here together. You know, just looking. You know, even in the Nubia chat, and thank you, Jermaine. Jermaine just texted. I just put in the Nubia chat, and Jermaine Wells says, "This is who Maria Corina Machado really is. She helped lead the 2002 coup that briefly overthrew a democratically elected president." That's true. That is I'm looking at his face now. Hugo Chavez. If you see the documentary, The Revolution Will Not Be Televised, remember that European film crew was following him around in 2002, just as any kind of, as a matter of course, doing a documentary on him. And the coup went down while they were with Chavez. So they were in the presidential palace. And so the documentary comes out, and you see how the Western media, I think, who was it? Condoleezza Rice. And the propagandists were saying, oh, there's chaos in the streets, kind of what they're doing in Portland and LA and Chicago and Memphis right now. And then, but the documentary cameras are showing how they got a staged protest over here in this little corner of downtown. They were banging on the bottom of these pans and pots. These are the rich Venezuelans. They were trying to stage a coup. And so Chavez was not being, they couldn't overthrow him because the military would not. They tried to recruit the military to come against him. So yeah, that's exactly right. So he says she helped lead the 2002 coup that briefly overthrew a democratically elected president and signed the Carmona decree that erased the Constitution and dissolved every public institution overnight. Carmona was in the Venezuelan legislature. He's on the take from these Western powers. And so he said, we're abolishing the Constitution. If you watch the documentary, The Revolution Will Not Be Televised, you will see how they stage coups in Latin America. And this is under George W. Bush. It would have been Barack Obama too. I'm sorry, y'all. Chocolate Wonder would have followed that same playbook because there's oil in Venezuela. So what you see is Carmona, they overthrew the government. They used the legislature to try to get rid of the Constitution. Then Jermaine writes, she worked hand in hand with Washington to justify regime change. Fact. using her platform to demand foreign military intervention to, quote, liberate Venezuela through force. Fact, she cheered on Donald Trump's threats of invasion and, to the point you just raised, his naval deployments in the Caribbean, a show of force that risks igniting regional war under the pretext of combating narco trafficking. While Trump sent warships and froze assets, Machado stood ready to serve as his local proxy, promising to deliver Venezuela's sovereignty on a silver platter. That is absolutely correct. And in the YouTube chat, somebody, and it's going past, so now I saw it, asked, if she's in exile and hiding, how did the Nobel Committee contact her? So what I'm saying is that we're all together in this. This is the classroom. You and I don't need to know. Nobody needs to know everything. You know what I'm saying? This is the beauty of it, Prof. This is the beauty of this. You know what I'm saying?
So now you know how complicit everyone is. You know, even as a child, you know, I remember I'm supposed to be scared of Gaddafi. I remember that. I remember being in a gym and was like, oh my God, Gaddafi. I remember, you know, we talked last week about being, you know, scared of Joanne Chesimard, Assata Shakur, because I was told she was the most dangerous woman in the world. And then in my spirit, though, I was like, what did Gaddafi do? Like, I was scared, you know, all I know is I was scared. Now you're thinking about Nobel, the inventor, I think of the dynamite and all this stuff, and put together a peace prize. You know, and the complicity during Nazi Germany of Switzerland, you think about how, again, the narrative has been foisted upon us in the classrooms where we are graded on our ability to regurgitate the lie.
Yes.
And it's hard to make that shift for a lot of us, right? Because we got straight A's in memorizing your lies, and we're scholars now, or some people have gotten whole ass PhDs mastering the lie. And then you run into the truth, and your spirit knows it's the truth. So you have to throw out everything that you have mastered and run over here. Most of us are not going to throw away that to come over into the truth. So that's really my concern. Like, once, you know, I got graded on this, I'm good. I got degrees in this, I'm good. You know, it's like I wrote a book. I'm not gonna say this book that I wrote is not true. You know, I'm not gonna go out and contradict myself. I just got a book deal.
How about that? And I'm writing books with increasingly fewer words and increasingly dumber and increasingly broad based. And I'm not going to jeopardize my money. And that's understandable. And, you know, but you're showing it every day, Prof. I mean, we are striving to know better so that we can do better. That clean glass of water metaphor is essential because, as you said, your spirit knows when you read a thing that something doesn't fit just right. And our bodies, just like our bodies know that, you used to drinking Coca-Cola or rum and Coke or whatever, quarter waters and whatever else you're drinking and milkshakes. And then you have some water and your body is telling you, do some more of that. But your brain is like, but it ain't got no salt, no shit. As Sunyata always says, you know what I'm saying? But ultimately, if you keep doing it, and that's the muscle that we work week after week, day after day. And listen, I'm telling you, this is the blessing of this space. This is the blessing of you. This is the blessing of the last, now going on 6 years. When we slow down, if we can, as we've talked about several times in this space, pause, we can reset. And there is no measure to my gratitude for being able to be in community with every living soul here. And all of the souls who started with us while they were on top of the earth that are now universal because they have graduated back to eternity. And for all the souls who will come in after we have been here physically in conversation, after we are all ancestors, because this space has been generated and will be increasingly secured in a world where those who would oppress others because of their fear, their greed, try to manage to disconnect all of us and hitch all of us to their purposes. And by that, I mean the attempt to control how we talk with one another, there will come a time, maybe sooner rather than later, when we won't have this platform, because the electricity will have been commandeered by others. There will come a time when we won't not only be able to afford an internet uplink, but we will be denied having it. There is already a time, as you mentioned last week, quite clearly, when the algorithm will press down things like this and amplify, as you say, the foolishness, the spew, the vomit, the feces, the urine on these quote unquote platforms, and amplify that and press us down, which is again, parenthetically, why we can't defeat the algorithm, but we can certainly drive it more toward what we are doing here and like-minded things by subscribing, at least in this short term. Let them, force them to change, force Alphabet and Google and YouTube to change, even by subscribing. Not because you want to hear a ding every time we go live and there's a ding and you can be, no, you don't need another ding in your life, but subscribe and tell everybody else to do it, even your friends. I don't watch that. Just go over and subscribe. Why? Because we're going to force them to force their hand on the algorithm. But there will come a time when even that won't be enough, which is why you had the vision to say, let us build out another platform. Let us have Knarrative and let us have Nubia, which is crystal clear how important it is, even as where I teach in a physical classroom, Howard University now grappling WHUT, funding cut, public television. And so now they got to go out and raise funds and get donations. And, somebody asked about the PBS passport, and the brother who's the general manager of WHUT and WHUR, the radio station, my friend, he said, WHUT is part of PBS, and PBS has Passport, which is the PBS version of Netflix. That's true. But Russell Vogt, nasty piece of work, a little man who ultimately is insignificant now, and unfortunately has traded any potential future significance of his minor life for the obscurity of eternity by his nasty little actions now, would love to nothing more than to wipe out the public broadcasting system. But, Nubia becomes even more important. Narrative becomes even more important in those moments. But, there's the question of servers, there's the questions of satellites, there's a question of networks, and ultimately they may come for Narrative and Nubia, which means that when the collaborations that are on the horizons, the things that we can do in real time, which means connect with our family. Again, the blackface nativists lose the narrative, lose the thread, lose the importance of being connected, not divided, because the United States of America isn't the only country with people who have satellites. The United States of America isn't the only country with people who have businesses that connect. So strengthening our connections not only staves off the ability to separate us from each other through the science and technology, it strengthens our ability to withstand and transcend any attempt to do so. So these moments after moments, these weeks after weeks, these days after days are very important, So yeah, subscribe to this channel, subscribe to the Karen Hunter channel, subscribe to Black Star Network, subscribe to these places that when you put them together, that's what's going to pop up in your feed more. Because when you do that, when you search, you have to go searching for us, and then there you don't see it. No, just get in there and subscribe. I mean, it's very important to understand. Let's overwhelm that algorithm and force them to use a heavier hand. It's important to understand this is how we battle from day to day. And thinking about that this week in our theme, Ancestors' Wildest Dreams. We are not well, maybe we are, and we'll come to that. That's the kind of guiding theme that is thinking about over the arc of the week between when we were together last week and now. There's a lot to consider when it comes to being still, to slowing down, to thinking, because the strategy of these fascists, driven by fear, driven by severely diminished mental capacity in terms of the president of the United States, driven by the attempt to safeguard profit by simply not taking a side that you think will diminish your stock value or your subscription base, which is what the commercial news entertainment media is doing by propping up a man who is clearly mentally diminished and unwell as if he is rational, and allowing that vomit to continue to wash over us. At this moment, we can make different choices. We're making different choices. And that's what I want to say that too, before we continue. We have made different choices. Everyone here right now, in real time and in real time later, it's all real time after all, is making a different choice. And that different choice wasn't born for most of us in the moment that our conversations started. It was born long before that. We search for each other. And as we have conversations and talk with other people, we bring them into this space and we talk with one another. That is the deep and abiding value, one of the deep and abiding values of having a platform like Knarrative and a space like Nubia. Because on Monday night, as we did last Monday night again, thank you, Brother Davin, we'll talk about that in a minute, we reveal to each other the strength and the power of community and thinking together and pushing each other together and questioning each other in a governance space, because it is who we are to each other. And that turns that other noise all the way down. Again, thanks, Jermaine, for putting in a succinct fashion what the context was for the awarding of the Nobel Peace Prize. And it's available to everyone, not just in Nubia, but through YouTube. Anybody with an uplink, with an ability to get on the internet, will see this. And so it's very important. I was thinking this week, because we're on the cusp of Indigenous Peoples Day, and I love watching Donald Trump. I really do. In those moments when he is so thoroughly unhinged that, well, I don't really look at him, because whatever that orange makeup homebrew that he's slapping on his face, whatever that is masking or trying to mask and hide, I would prefer he have it on than not, because I can only imagine what he looks like underneath that. So I'm not necessarily looking at him. I look at the people in the room. So yesterday, when he went on about bringing Columbus Day back, I look at the hostages and some of the sycophants behind them. And it's quite entertaining, to see them stand there, these two-dimensional characters, all supplicants. And I'm saying that because, we are going live, and those who'll be watching later, you'll be in the wake of Indigenous Peoples Day on Monday. There's no need to have a day except that rituals bind societies together. So on Indigenous Peoples Day, of course, he vomited that they're bringing Columbus Day back. And there's a hell, and I would say you could go to it, but you live in it already, Donald John, and all your little friends. So, y'all can stay in that hell. It's not Columbus Day. It never will be Columbus Day ever again, my friend. Not for the world. For your little knot of white nativists and supremacists, for your little addled brain Stephen Miller and his little friends, sure. You do what you want. It's not a problem. But on this Indigenous Peoples Day weekend, I was thinking about the fact there's only been 7 years. 7 years ago, this weekend, a student of mine and now a friend, Nick Cannon, we were doing independent study while he was finishing his undergraduate degree at Howard. His brother Javen had been a student before. He was in my class, and I looked up the first week of class, and here comes this young man in this turban with a hoodie on. What the hell? This is Nick Cannon. What you doing here? I enrolled in this class. Oh, okay, my brother said he take this class. Oh, well, come on. And I'm gonna tell you, it ain't no fake. He went to class. He stayed in class, and then afterwards, he said, he'd taken a red eye from L.A. to get there. So I'm like, wow, okay, all right, you commit. Let's see how long this stays. Well, actually, it kept up for years, and that turned into the two of us after my second class of the morning. I have 8 o'clock in the morning class. I'm from Tennessee State, Ed Temple, only the pure in heart. So I want the early risers, which ain't nothing for high school students. You're an hour later than when you would normally be in school. So it's not a problem. So I want those people. So after I would finish my mid-morning class, the two of us, Nick and I, would go back to my office. And for the years he was at Howard, we engaged in reading intensives. Read. I asked, what you want to read? What you want to know about? What you trying to study now? And he would talk about roles he had auditioned for, who had been pitched to him. One time he said, I was pitched for Sam Cooke. I said, well, let's read Sam Cooke biography. So we read Rodaldick's big book on Sam Cooke, talking about that. And then he went to talk about voting, the importance of voting. So, and he was talking about he had just seen Dick Gregory. So let's read all Dick Gregory's books. And then that led to a discussion. It was very interesting. He and Angela Rye having a conversation at Howard on whether to vote or not. It was an important conversation. And then one day he said, I would love to have this conversation for more people. So he makes a call, and his boys came down from New York, and they filmed a conversation we had about Columbus. And that was the first iteration of what he called canons class. And I thought, wow. So yesterday as I was thinking about it, I was over Sankofa, and shout out to everybody there. Really just, I mean, it had been too long since I was able to just go over there, and I was there for about 6 hours. And then at the end, me and Holly just sitting in the back, chopping it up. He's putting the finishing touches on his latest film. Stay tuned for the debut. But I was thinking on the way back to my place, saying, yeah, damn, it's been how many years? Only 7 years since that first canons class. So, I hit Nick up, say, man, look, because he got the t-shirt, it's canons class right here. I figured I rep canons class this morning for a minute, because that was the first step toward this. And of course, Nick started doing canons class on the West Coast, and then some things went left and right, and but the thing I appreciate about that early space was that it was an attempt, a successful attempt, I think, because then we started bringing in, my colleagues, got Jules Harrell and Kevin Washington, some psychologists come in, to talk. I mean, we did that. It's very important because people need to see, in my mind at that moment, and me and Nick talking about this, that you need to see HBCU faculty, Black HBCU faculty, because when we think of HBCUs, we have been curated, if you never went to one or been around one, to think marching bands, cheerleaders, football teams, basketball teams. In other words, games and playing and dancing and all that. So what better space to have faculty having a conversation that was placed on YouTube, and all these are on YouTube, so you can see them. But what better space to have that conversation than in Founders Library, in the Department of African American Studies, in our African American Studies Research Center, which still exists, although thanks to COVID and some fairly unjustifiable actions by administration, the books in our resource center are temporarily unavailable. We're looking to restore them now, to put them there. We got the books, and storage got to bring them back. And I'm keeping both eyes on that, by the way. It's not the center of my work anymore. This is the center in a sense of having a global classroom that we can have this conversation. But I'm bringing it up to say that what better place at that moment to have a table where somebody who people know because of social structure, cultural meaning making, and pop culture, who played an HBCU student in a marching band, sit at a table with faculty who are almost never mentioned except the band director in a film like Drumline, and who are almost never mentioned in any stories about HBCUs, the faculty, to make them visible for hundreds of thousands of people. And then ultimately, over the arc of the series, I don't know how many people have viewed, because I don't know I know we were on this and I saw it on YouTube. I don't know wherever else it is and it lives. I'm saying all that to say all that was an important momentum to get started. And then COVID. And a conversation between two friends who became friends thanks to, my sister Ajua brought them up in New York. And now we're like, oh man, Karen Hunter. We had a conversation in Sirius XM, and then COVID. And can I press record? And so now here we are with something that we didn't have before that draws on the things we had before. So this didn't drop out of the sky. This comes from decades of thinking, of being in community, from in this space right here, two people who have been college teachers for a very long time, who have the good sense to know that we will both and we will all die not knowing everything we need to know. So we got to get in community, because together we will not know everything we need to know, but we'll know a lot more than we would individually. If we got out of here right now and I read the rest of my life, I would still be not near close to what I need to know. And so when you see somebody like W.E.B. Du Bois constantly changing his positions in terms of more factual information, changing how he approaches things, but never swerving from his grounding central commitment to live life fully in service to other people, which is the grounding principle we can have. And that is always the way you can distinguish between the people who mean us harm and the ones who mean us good. That would be my guiding barometer. Then we know that we have a space here. And when we think about our ancestors in this context, we started with the little clip we saw there of one-time city council member, and I think state assembly member at one moment. I don't know, Prof. You would remember better than me. I'm thinking off the top of my head. Adam Clayton Powell IV, one of the children of Adam Clayton Powell Jr. And you hear him standing there. Is
With
that
with with the Spanish accent.
yeah, Puerto Rican. Yeah, his mom was Puerto Rican. Did you ever
Part of America, right? Okay, just checking.
No, let me ask you, did you ever encounter, you're in New York, I mean,
Yeah, I mean,
of course, I know it was on city council.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, didn't have intimate, knowledge, interviewed just about everybody. So,
Yeah, I say, I figured you knew,
definitely have had, and I've always been interested because there's the third and the fourth that are all that are
right.
brothers. Everything Power was so messy. Like,
Messy.
so it was always confusing to me. I was like, okay, but I'm gonna mind my business.
Yeah. No, I mean, but one thing he did, live his life out loud. I'm like, dude, because the kids, wait a minute, you the fourth, you the third, but okay, you know what? Go with God. That's a beautiful thing. But to see him in that clip, standing in that church, speaking to city officials and ultimately federal officials about another thing that began as a thing in the living, breathing, pulsing now. This week in 1991, October the 9th, construction had gotten underway for what eventually would become the Ted Weiss Federal Building, Lower Manhattan, and Duane Street. Some of y'all know where that is. New Yorkers know, and anyone who's visited that building knows. And as that construction was going on, bones were uncovered. And we've talked about this many times in class, so we won't go through it again today, but we want to start with that little 2-minute piece there with the voices of Ossie Davis and Ruby Dee and Maya Angelou and Adam Clayton Powell IV, talking about the New York African burial ground, because it was October the 9th, 1991, that as that construction site was being prepared, bones were discovered. And I've been there so many times now, I wouldn't even hesitate to guess as to how many times I've been, most of those times with students. When we did the freshman seminar and opened it up. And so like on a day like today, this is before there was an in-class, we would probably have to have our sessions on Friday nights, because by now I would be probably about an hour south of New York, headed into the city with 5 buses of students every Saturday from the middle of September to the middle of October. 4 Saturdays in a row, 4 or 5 buses to get as many students who wanted to go to the New York African Burial Ground to go through the ritual of coming into an awareness of what we owe those ancestors, and how Howard University in particular played a role, because for a full decade after those bones were discovered, after construction was stopped, because some of the people even in this space right now, on YouTube and Knarrative sides, Nubia sides, some of the people who are in here right now, and some people who will see this later on in this week, were among those who lay down in front of the bulldozers, who said, you will not continue this. Some of you were the ones who went to those meetings. Some of y'all were probably in there with Adam Clayton Powell IV, or Mother Melba Franklin, or Reverend Herbert Daughtry, or so many others. Some of you may even have been at the public hearings convened by the then chair of the House Ways and Means Committee, because Democrats had the House, and that would be Gus Savage, Congressman Gus Savage out of Chicago, who said, I'm shutting down everything. This funding is not going to continue unless and until these people and these ancestors and these bones are treated with respect. Howard Dodson testifying at that committee, John Henry Clark, Professor Hunter's label mate at Hunter College, at least in terms of both of them having served on that faculty at different times, testified. And the community of Africans of the 5 boroughs of New York and then Jersey and then the outlying areas came to protest, came to witness, came to testify, so that ultimately the first iteration of research on the Africans who were buried in that burial ground which had thousands of people, or maybe as many as 16,000 people from the 18th and 19th centuries buried in that burial ground from the time of New Amsterdam through the time of New York. But 419 of those disturbed remains of the souls who are now ancestors, of course, were disinterred. And First Pace University was leading the charge, and those Africans who lay down in front of those bulldozers, who went to those meetings, who organized, who rallied, said, no, God bless the people who have come from Pace University to help us, the students and the faculty. But let's be very clear, Black people have to lead this. And so Howard University was entrusted with the 419 remains of those ancestors for a full decade. And that overlapped with the time I came. By the time I came to Howard in the year 2000, they had been on campus for several years, and I will never forget when they were brought back to New York. I would never forget that. A ritual of return, a ritual of ancestral return that began with a sundown ritual in the Andrew Rankin Memorial Chapel in 2003, September 2003. When it was time for those ancestors to be returned to their final physical resting place. And when you hear Adam Clayton Powell IV say, you don't disturb our ancestors. But if you're going to move our ancestors, it's got to be done with respect, and it's got to be done in a certain process. And every time I've gone to the New York African burial ground, I've heard the story, and it's been very consistent. And I want to say that in the context of our notion of who we are to each other, our governance formation, because I've heard from elders, including people who were there during the protests and everything. I knew a lot of those folk. Many of them are ancestors now, the great Alton Maddox and Leola Maddox and so many others who helped lead that charge, who said that it was one of the construction workers that blew the whistle on this was a brother, Afro-Latino, spiritual practitioner. I've heard of Santeria. Never talked with this brother, but here we are in this global classroom and would love nothing more than to have him tell that story rather than me hearing it from others who heard it from him. He was like, these are our ancestors. You're not going to do this to our ancestors. But he got a hard hat on working on a construction site. But that's who he is to you. That's a social structure. Who he is to us is an African, and with a way of knowing that understands how we deal with ancestors. And so in that ritual of return in September 2003, I was sitting in the Andrew Rankin Chapel, and I watched my students, 2 by 2, having placed the bones of those ancestors in 419 wooden caskets carved in West Africa, carved in Ghana, and lined with kente, woven kente cloth, woven for that specific purpose. I watched them carry those remains into the Andrew Rankin Chapel, where a ritual of return began. And as we all sat there in that packed chapel, and Eleanor Traylor read poetry, the great poetess, the great literary critic, the great cultural meaning maker and practitioner of movement and memory, Eleanor Traylor, friend and comrade of Toni Morrison, as we watched Pat Swigert, then the president of Howard University, opened the ritual. Bernard Richardson, the dean of the chapel, prayed. And then, of course, it's sitting in the choir stand was not a choir, but the elders, many of whom from New York, had led that charge, who had come down to New York for that specific purpose. And I watched them pour libation, and I watched the dancers. My friend Sherelle Berryman Johnson, now an ancestor. I watched her dancers come over from fine arts. I watched And Still I Rise read. And then one by one, city by city, those bones in those caskets were taken from Philly to Baltimore, and when another ritual occurred, and from Baltimore into Wilmington, Delaware, where another ritual was occurred, and then from Wilmington, Delaware into Philadelphia at Mother Bethel AME, where yet another ritual occurred, and then from Mother Bethel in Philly to Trenton, New Jersey, where another ritual took place, and then from Trenton to Jersey City, where they were put on a barge and floated across the Hudson to Lower Manhattan for all night dancing and drumming. And then I was there in October the 3rd, memory serves me correctly, 2003, 22 years ago, when those caskets were slotted into 7 wooden crypts and lowered into the ground as poetry was read. Maya Angelou, Still I Rise, Cicely Tyson, Delroy Lindo. And you couldn't get close to the crypts because we were jammed up like this. Thousands of people, many of whom had been there all night. movement and memory, our ancestors. So when we talk about being our ancestors' wildest dreams, that's a question you got to ask yourself. What does that mean? Because I was also there for the dedication of the monument, the great Rodney Leon, the Afro-Haitian sculptor who designed the New York African Burial Ground monument that was dedicated in 2007 after he won the competition. And I was there 10 years later to pour libation at the invitation of the National Park Service. Shout out to Jimmy Cleckley. Shout out to all my friends who continue to guard that sacred site, who are now furloughed because the site is not available, the inside, because they also, in the federal building that was built eventually, not on the burial ground site, but they kept that quarter acre out. But they built that building, and then in the lobby of the building, there's a cosmogram, cultural meaning making and a movement in memory by the great Houston Conwell, the work of the great Barbara Chase Rebolt, statues. Those of you who've been there, you know. And so I'm saying all that to say that those people who stand watch, not just African people, Afro-Latin and Afro-Anglo, who are park rangers, but white, Asian. If there is a type of human being in New York City, I can tell you that they have probably been a park ranger at the New York African Burial Ground. And I'm telling you, not just from what I've studied, but what I've seen every time I've gone up there. Poured libations at Kwanzaa's, at the anniversary, saw Reverend Daughtry a couple of years ago when they looked and they did the 20th anniversary. So I'm saying that all that to say that Baba Cleckley, my man, I know y'all coming back. I know that little nasty piece of work, the thin-minded religious zealot named Russell Vogt is going to try to fire you. But my little friend Russ Vogt, with your tiny worldview, your crumbling tiny worldview driven by the deep fear of your irrelevance, and I can assure you, my friend, that you are deeply irrelevant and will be so for all eternity. Your world is crumbling now, and in your death fleet of your world, you try to strike forth to stop the rest of our humanity. My friend, you are completely irrelevant. And you may try to harm some of these folk, like these good people at the National Park Service, in the short term. But trust me, my friend, you will lose. So I'm saying all that to say that in this moment, I always feel when it gets to October, in that moment, I remember that New York African Burial Ground. I remember my friend Mark Edward Mack, who lost his life in a car accident from time ago, 2012, if memory serves me correctly, or 13. But Mark Mack, who led the Montague Cobb Lab after my friend Michael Blakey, who was the director of the Montague Cobb Lab, where those bones were for a decade on the campus of Howard University, had departed for William and Mary, and Mark took the lead there. And then Fatima Jackson, the great biological anthropologist, became the director of the Montague Cobb Lab in the wake of Mark Mack's untimely death and premature ancestorhood. These are the guardians. This is why we study. This is why we do the work that we do. And this is why when those Africans confronted the federal government and said, no, Black people must leave this, there was an institution to do it. This is the value of the historically Black colleges and universities. So on this anniversary weekend, I just think about that, and I think about it because our ancestors are all around us. They are in us. We are literally them. Our physical bodies are the convenings of two other people. And those two people came from 4, and they came from 8, and they came from 16, and they came from 32, all the way back to the beginning, which we are headed back toward, because for the ancient Egyptians, one of their words for ancestors are those in front of us. We are going toward those Africans in the New York African Burial Ground, not away from them. Our ancestors are not only in back of us, they are in front of us, and they are around us, and they are in us, they are here. And so this week, I'm thinking a lot about those ancestors. And when people say, my ancestors' wildest dreams, we've talked about that. And I would fully embrace that. I would say, absolutely, we are. And I think that those dreams, in terms of what they imagined for us or what they imagined for themselves, woke those ancestors, many of them when they were physically on top of the earth, up in the middle of the night, and they rubbed the sleep out of their eyes, shook their heads, and said it was a bad dream. Yeah, your wildest dream can be a nightmare, my friend. And if you think that their wildest dreams was used cutting a Django leg for a bunch of killers in Saudi Arabia as a quote unquote comedian, or if you think that their wildest dream was attacking Black women on radio platforms, yelling at the top of your voice, if you think that their wildest dream was running through the country trying to harass other Black people in service of your master, if you think that was their wildest dream, I agree with you, but I think that wildest dream is probably a nightmare. And so I think a lot about what those ancestors in the New York African burial ground, and as Maya Angelou said there at the end of the clip that we just played, in Arkansas where she was born, in Tennessee where I was born, in Ghana, in Nigeria, in Jamaica and Barbados, in Colombia, in everywhere we are, in London. I wonder what those ancestors would be thinking now. And I think it wouldn't be very different than what we're thinking now, because the social structure moment we face is radically different than the social structure they faced, and also very much the same. So the lesson that we should probably have in this moment is that we must pause and we must center ourselves. On Thursday night, I poured a libation, a symbolic libation, for a group of Howard students that convened around the flagpole on the upper quadrangle at Howard to think about and remember and dedicate themselves to not being silent about until justice is served. However we define justice, 21-year-old Trey Reed, who was found in a tree in September at Delta State University in Mississippi. Shout out to the good brother Colin Kaepernick, who paid for a second autopsy. The results have not yet been released, but in part to push back against a social structure and a commercial news media entertainment complex and a weaponized social media world that tried to immediately say that this young bull killed himself. But see, we have a governance formation, and some of the people in our governance formation, like everyone here, have a couple of dollars to rub together, or even a couple of pennies, and just so happens Colin Kaepernick has more than a couple of dollars, so he's coming in, as he has done before, I'll pay for the autopsy for the family. And so we understand that there are ways in our governance formation to take advantage of those momentary victories we have won in social structure formations. And so we don't look to our athletes and entertainers to be our leaders. We look at them, we should look to them to be our athletes and entertainers. And if they so happen to show characteristics which allow for that leadership to emerge in somewhere other than the field and the stage, then we should absolutely embrace. But to assume that because we all know someone's name, they have an obligation to be a leader, well, that would then turn over your entire convening to someone who never signed up for that. Enjoy Dave Chappelle. One of the largest numbers of views that we got in this space called in class was the week we kind of broke down the piece that he did in the heart of COVID in Ohio, which was a brilliant kind of recitation. And it gave us an opportunity to go through his birth genealogy, go through his mother's line and his father's line. The Chappelle's out of South Carolina. And that's why Bishop Chappelle, his great-grandfather, I think, has the auditorium named for him at Allen University in Columbia, South Carolina, and his mother, Dr. Yvonne Sion, who still walks the earth, a brilliant early founding member of the contingent at the universities that gave birth to what we now call Black Studies, still teaching in this space. But Dave Chappelle is not a leader because he's a comedian. And of course, Prof, yes, and we should always remind ourselves of that. Not only the Chappelle line, but the Hunter line out of South Carolina coming in. Your pops, huh? Your pop, what class? Do you know the year of your pops graduation? What was he, class of?
63 or 64? Because he married my mom. He married my mom shortly after graduating. He worked in a reform school with my uncle
Really?
in South Carolina, and that's how they met. And then my uncle brought my dad home to Augusta to meet my grandmother, and then he said, "Who is that? Who's that?"
Oh,
yeah, my grandmother was a great card player. My dad loved to play cards, so she was brilliant. Taught me like
you got it honest. It came in the blood, huh?
Oh my God. Yeah. So he came over to play cards and left with a wife. So yeah.
I say, let me ring that bell. This is the genius of our people. This is the genius. Yes, indeed. So, you know, I can't be mad at Dave Chappelle. You made some contributions, brother. You over there with the Saudis. You in Riyadh telling jokes, you know, and the contract you signed say you can't say nothing about the royal family because that's where the money coming from. So you definitely can't talk about Khashoggi. You can't talk about a man who was literally dismantled limb from limb. Yeah, okay, that's fine.
Can
And
I
as one of the
can I
critics,
ask you a question? I'm sorry. I
yes,
just,
no.
you know, talking about Ernest Gaines. Is it Gaines, right? The photographer? No, what's his name? The
Ernest Withers.
Withers.
Yes.
Talking about
Photographer.
Ernest Withers.
Yes.
So we were talking this week about Van Jones, the $100 million that. So I'm always asking, like, what's the expectation when they give you money? And I think a lot of us, you know, because I've been in this situation, I'm probably one of the few people that have given money back. Once I realized, I was like, oh, no, take this money. Come get it. Here. Matter of fact, give me back my rice too. Here's some money. I'm giving you money now. That I didn't have, but I recognized early on that there's always a price. And, you know, there's a time, especially when you're young, where you can tell the lie to yourself that I can flip this or I'm going to use this money for good. Okay, so if I have to not talk about that, but then I get to fund maybe a whole village or whatever, people have, I guess, reconciled in their spirit. But I also know that a little bit of yeast is so powerful, just a smidge. So you have to be careful. But, you know, how do we, those of us who consume, how do we navigate our stars who may sit next to a Jared and an Ivanka while, you know, while they, you know, take money from Tiffany's and Levi's, but they're doing good in the community and my hair's coming back on my edges. Like, how do I you know, what do we do with them? And how do we engage, Dr. Carr?
No, I think you just said it. The reality is that none of us are pure and none of us are irredeemable. I think that, you know, we lead with love and generosity and we don't expect things of people that we shouldn't. So yeah, I don't have any problem. I mean, do what you do you. I'm not going to stop listening to Dave Chappelle. I'm not going to stop laughing at him or Bill Burr and these people, but I don't look at them as anything other than no different than me. And so I think that, to me, that's how we approach it. I mean, you know, when we saw the Undertaker of the family in his dead man suit, as he used to call it in the South, Jared Kushner, show up in Cairo this week, at that point, you know what the end game is. They've gotten what they need to get. They're in place. It was unsustainable. The continued slaughter of the Palestinians was unsustainable. When you see young Jared show up in his dead man suit, then you know now that the deal about to be made because this is the developer. You've reduced Gaza to rubble. And now you want to clean it off and put your casinos and your condos there. And then at that point, you invite these comedians in and you want to tell a few jokes. Then I think you will have another choice to make. And maybe you'll choose to perform there. And, you know, just, you know, and by the way, I mean, I would be in a position to say this in this context, but I think we're all human. We all have moments in the world. Shout out to Kamala Harris. Shout out to Kamala Debbie Harris, who finally had enough when some of the free Palestine people showed up at one of her book talks this week. And she said, okay, and stood up and said, I'm not president of the United States. You gonna go down there and tell that to the White House? Hey, the people yelling free Palestine, absolutely correct. I think it should be said a whole lot more at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. But Kamala Harris did not win the election. And they said, well, she would have done the same thing. I would invite you on Monday, those of you who think that that's true, to come on in the office hours and let's talk about that. Let's walk through it because that's so absolutely factually incorrect as far as, it's not factually incorrect because we don't know because she was never the president. She wasn't the president when she was the vice president. But I'm saying all that, I just put that in the footnote. Now, coming back to the point they were raising, what we saw in Gaza, if past is prelude, and this is why we study the past, to give us a sense of what may occur, even if it doesn't occur, we're prepared and wouldn't be surprised. The reniggers of the state of Israel government, not the Israeli people, and certainly not the Jewish people worldwide, because when you say Jews, What the hell does that mean? You got Falasha, Ethiopian, Beta Israel Jews. You got Hebrew Israelites. You got Africans here. I mean, come on, let's not do that. But in terms of the state of Israel and the Israeli government, if past is prelude, then once these hostages are returned, either their bodies or them living, then the war resumes. If past is prelude. But for this one moment in time, this brief moment in time, at least the bombs are not dropping and the guns are not dropping in the same quantity. If you think the Israeli Defense Force is ever leaving Gaza absent some type of pressure that has not yet emerged, you're not paying attention. But I'm saying all that to say that that same Jared Kushner with his wife Ivanka will be sitting next to Jay-Z and Beyonce or whoever else. They might be sitting at the Super Bowl together again. Who knows? While Bad Bunny performs. And doggone Christy Nome puts on another hair hat with her wig stapled to whatever baseball cap she'll be wearing as she cosplays law enforcement scanning the parking lots that surround the Super Bowl. All of that will happen at the same time. And some people will be driven to a frenzy because somehow you think that you live in a world of right and wrong instead of the world where people are stumbling through from birth to death trying to work it out for themselves. And that's the mistake we make. We live in the world we build. And if enough of us want to build a similar world, we can live in a better world than the one we live in right now. And thank you, Lorna, in the Nubia chat, the Nubia Mbongi, as we call it in Nubia, when you say, I went to the African burial ground in Shacole Bottom in Richmond, Virginia. Absolutely. To an event for Gabriel Prosser, who was going to lead one of the biggest insurrections here in Virginia. If any of y'all bus riders, you know that's you see the marker for the Gabriel Prosser rebellion when the bus pulls into Richmond, and you know me, I get behind the wheel of a car, I go anywhere in the world, but I like riding the bus because I can read and I just soak up the people around me. It's a different way, and plus it just keeps you humble. See, some people got used to better, and that's why you took a check to go dance for the Saudis, even though they dismantling people in the royal family, and you kikied, and at least some people were honest and said, like, what's the boy that used to be on Saturday Night Live? I did it for the money, Pete Davis. But at any rate, I'm not one of those people. So yeah, when you ride the bus, you come through on the dog or the mega bus or whatever, come through there, you go into the Greyhound station, you're going to pass a marker that says this is where Gabriel Prosser's rebellion was about to be set off. So thank you, Lorna, for that. And she continues in the Mbongi in the chat and says, we are fighting hard here to keep this burial ground. They unveiled a beautiful mural. Yes, absolutely. And for those of you who haven't been there, she says, when you come to Richmond, please visit at 16th Street and Broad. It is a beautiful space. They wanted to make the burial ground a parking lot. They absolutely did. Thank you, Lorna, for reminding us of that. My friend and brother who is at Virginia Commonwealth University, Sean Yetzi, who at one time was the editor of Journal Black Psychology, a brilliant brother, a very good brother, a dedicated brother who helped lead the work there to make sure that that burial ground was established. Thank you for raising the African burial ground at Shacole Bottom in Richmond. Absolutely. This is why we are together, y'all. This is why, because none of us knows enough individually. All of us don't know enough collectively, but all of us know collectively a whole lot more than any of us can know individually. And we also are demonstrating to each other that we are not only the classroom, we are the formation that will lead to the action that will help everybody. It's very important to understand. There, you know, somebody's asked in the YouTube chat, and Dukes, Dr. Carr, how do we avoid this pretentious, or probably even potential, because it's definitely pretentious too, civil war? I don't know that you can't avoid it. Again, I will say one more time, and then we'll continue in this. When you read W.E.B. Du Bois's Suppression of the African Slave Trade to the United States, the first book that he wrote and published based on his doctoral dissertation, at the end of that book, he says, no one would have looked on with more horror at the unfolding of the events of the Civil War than the so-called founding fathers, or as Alton Maggs would call them, fleeing felons. He says, because they poured into the foundation of this criminal enterprise. I'm calling it the criminal enterprise. He didn't, well, not in those words. The inevitability of this conflict. What I'm saying is that every so often this conflict returns and bursts out into the open. This is white nationalism, white nativism, white supremacy. It is the guiding and founding principle of this criminal enterprise called United States of America, a settler colony, no different than Israel, no different than Argentina, no different than Brazil, no different than any space in the world where one group came and displaced another group and then established on the foundations of their own mythology a lie. This country was found completely in this criminal enterprise, which is what white dominance over all the rest of us. You've killed millions, and yet we're still here. You have attempted to break us, and yet we are still here. You have attempted to vent and vomit your silly worldview on the rest of us, and yet we have maintained our sanity. In fact, it has been the thing that has not only sustained us, but put us in a position to finally break your political back, because you can count, can't you, little man? And as you count, little man, the numbers, the heads, as you and your little friend Russell Vogt bust your bald heads together to try to mash together some type of weapon that can somehow beat us back, you understand that it won't be enough. So this week, as you stood before cameras and vomited out the notion of the president having plenary power, and then appeared to freeze on camera when in fact somebody off camera probably told you it's not yet time to evoke the Insurrection Act, but you think it's coming, don't you, little man? You think somehow you're going to be able to drive this country into open warfare by trying to provoke people into busting the heads of ICE, or somehow rolling over people and fighting in the street, which can then allow you to get your signing pen, brain-addled, sundowning, difficult president of the United States to say, now I get to evoke the army, fueled by his own fear and hatred. You think that's coming, don't you, little man? I'm here to tell you, study history. And there will be more pain to come. We are in pain now. Oh, but ultimately, your guarantee of victory is shrinking by the second. We'll come back to that in a moment. So on the anniversary of this burial ground, and thinking about what these young people did, coming together to pour libation for Trey Reed and to share their thoughts about that, and being in discussion with folk. You know, I was talking yesterday over at Sankofa with the Garimas and Shrikiana, Mama Shrikiana Garima. They just came back, and shout out to everybody. Shout out to all the people in Nubia, particularly, who came to the San Antonio International African Film Festival, a brainchild of one of Shriek and Hailey's comrades there in San Antonio, Texas. So I saw some of the pictures. Y'all posted them on social media. So Lloyd, saw you there, brother. Saw you there, Marlon. Saw you there, Doc. My man Travis Armstrong, saw you there, Ms. Anelli, Ianelli. I was all there with Shriek and Hailey, and it was just beautiful to see everybody there. You know, I expect Lloyd and them to be there, because they right there. And then I drove over, so it was beautiful to see y'all there. And Travis, of course, is everywhere. I don't know how he comes everywhere. I look up in the airport. We head to Cairo to come. Travis, my man. It's always good to see you. And of course, Marlon, of course, fresh while he's grappling with the question of law school there. So I mean, it's beautiful to see y'all surround. So I was asking Shriek about it. Hadn't seen her. Well, I saw her last Sunday at Mbai Cham's memorial, which I'll talk about in a moment as well. But asking her, so yeah, how was it? I saw the video. I mean, I saw the pictures, and she said, yeah, it was great. This young person came up during the question and answer. We were talking and said, yeah, I saw Sankofa, and I want to know, when do we let the past go? Shriek said, I pondered that question, and I wanted to ask you that. I said, Shriek, I'm going to bring that over with my students next week. I'm going to ask that question. Because it's a question that was asked in the spirit of community, because obviously the person who asked it was there at the convening. And it made me think about this question of ancestors' wildest dreams. And then Shriek said something that I thought was brilliant. I mean, she said a lot of stuff that I think is brilliant, but this was, because it was so succinct. He said, I think for a lot of our people, past equals pain. That's it, Shriek. As young people would say, that's a bar. Past equals pain. If y'all repeat that, you attributed to Shrikiana Garima. Past equals pain. I said, damn, I think that's true. For the diseducated, for the disassociated, for the or dissocialized, past equals, when you think about the African past, you think of pain. Because it ain't the African past, it's the Black past, it's the N-word past. It's and meanwhile, the white nationalists have an imaginary view of their ancestors that drives their warped worldview. This is Stephen Miller's fever dream. Miller, your people wasn't even here when these burial grounds were started, or but when they were closed down. You weren't even here. And then you join a way of knowing that, just like Christianity, just like Islam, just like are ostensibly supposed to be about one thing, and you try to drive it into another thing. And your wife, who was born into that way of knowing, Judaism, right there with you. neck and neck, shoulder to shoulder. Your fever dream is driving these policies. Your glitch this week, when you start talking about plenary power, you said the loud part out loud just about 5 minutes too soon. And they told your ass to shut up. So you stood there. And the CNN anchor, Stephen. No, there ain't no freeze. The link didn't freeze. Ain't nothing wrong. They told him shut the F up. Because they out here talking reckless. The only person who gets to do that completely unhinged is his Lord and Master, because the sun's going down. Sun's getting real low. And so now you just start babbling, but this ain't that. And I'm saying, Trump's obsession with Antifa, that's Stephen Miller putting that battery in his back, among others, in the attempt to discredit anti-fascism as a term and an objective. Isn't just coming from Trump's addled brain and racism. It's coming from an attempt to trigger state violence, and it's driven by this narrow, nasty little worldview, and it's an imaginary worldview. It's an imaginary narrative. And so when Sheree says past equals pain, they don't want to deal with that with white nationalism. They want to say past equals pleasure. This is the stupidity of a month ago. We looked at Senator Schmidt from St. Louis, and if y'all haven't seen that, go back and look at that conversation we had, which led with the video of him saying, the United States is ours. We built this for us, not for other people. And if it's for everybody, it's for nobody. I embrace you, my friend. Come here, let me give you a hug. Yeah, let me give you a hug. Because your worldview is dying, my friend. In fact, you already know it's dead, because if you follow anybody around for 24 hours, you're much more likely to get a fuller picture of who they are than if you just catch them at a speech. Once he went home and got his back slaps and talked to his people, who knows what Senator Schmidt did after he didn't think anybody was looking. But I guarantee you this, somewhere in his life, he has done and may continue to be doing something that is the absolute refutation of that bullshit he said in front of people here in Washington, D.C. We built this for us. You want to put everybody out? Do you at 3 a.m. I'm not sure you want to. Do you want to put everybody out? No, my friend. My point is that these narratives are artificial, and they come from places in us that reflect our socialization. He wasn't born like that. Miller wasn't born like that. I wasn't born like I am right now. We all were socialized. Now, there are those who would argue that maybe we were born like that. I'm kind of like not one of those people. But, J.B. Pritzker is a white man. And when he stood there in Chicago and said, Donald Trump, you want to come? You can come to my people. You got to come through me. Come get me. And stood there. I'm saying, man, I see you because you're a billionaire. When the federal courts and the circuit courts have been pushing back against these clowns and this enabling, this attempt by the Supreme Court to enable this unchecked royal power. When the Negro hand servants and handmaidens and hand boy servants of white power are now attempting to trigger conflict. News this week, my students told me first, and I alerted everybody I could, because then I started getting texts and emails from colleagues at other HBCUs. And shout out to everybody in our family, our tight little faculty family. All of our people, Dan Black, Kalita Nichols sitting there, Norfolk State. All the people say, "Hey man, what's this Blexit tour? Turning Point USA is supposed to be now getting young Negroes to invade 10 HBCU campuses over the arc of the next month or so, and come to HBCU homecomings to try to get Black people to trigger them." And I'm saying, no, it's a governance formation. Who we are to each other. Don't let these people come for you. You can't send the white faces out. They tried that at Tennessee State. Now they're going to send the Black faces out? We're not going for that. We're not going for that. The question becomes, what did our ancestors and elders think? And what did they do? And what do we think they thought or did? Because see, narratives aren't just about what is in the past, it's how we talk about the past. So when Shriek says past equals pain, we think about these ostensible ass whippings. That's not the narrative. That's why those burial grounds are so important. Each one of those ancestors tells a story. And even in that brief moment, Prop, when you talk about your father and your uncle, and then, your grandmother, and then your mother, that's the people closest to us physically. Those people who made us, who literally made us. And in our DNA, and in their DNA, and in their parents' DNA, and in their parents' DNA, and in all of it is the hopes and the dreams. Those wild dreams can be triggered by a context where we are fed things that we reject because it is antithetical to our being. Let's take an example from social structure renderings. If you read Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol, remember, the first time Scrooge wakes up, he thinks it's an undigested bit of beef that has caused him to have this nightmare. Then he goes back to sleep. Past, present, and future. He's confronted with the inevitability that what we exist in is a stream of time that is unrelenting and absolutely true. So if you're an asshole not giving money to the poor and trying to cheat people and cheat your employees, Ebenezer Scrooge, Russell Vogt, if you're trying to do that, ultimately that awful day will surely come. And it ain't an undigested bit of beef, my friend. It's the reality that you are dead ass wrong. To repurpose Christopher Wallace, who got it going on, the weak or the strong? You're dead wrong. You think you're strong, but in fact, as Du Bois would write in the souls, in Credo, in his Credo, those who think they are powerful and then try to use that power to break other people are in fact presaging the death of the power they think they have. As Martin King says near the end of his life, that this American adventurism in Vietnam will ultimately lead to the death of this country. When Dr. King says near the end of his life that America has set itself up as some kind of policeman for the whole world, will only trigger the divinity that will say, I will rise up and put the power in another country and break the backbone of your power. Ask them in Canada and in Brazil and in Mexico. Ask them in China. Or as the sundown man would say, China. Ask them if the United States is getting stronger or weaker. Who got it going on? The weaker the strong. You're dead wrong. And so the whole idea then, whether you be an imaginary Ebenezer Scrooge or a very real Russell Vogt, you think your behavior is going to lead to one thing, but in fact, you will not be able to escape the fact that we live in a time stream, past, present, and future. So we ask, what do our ancestors think? What did they think? What did they do? We also have to ask, what do we think they thought or did? Because we're making up ancestors even as they existed. So we say we are our ancestors' wildest dreams. I take that statement as a barometer of what you think about yourself and what you think about them. And week after week, day after day, we are devoted and committed to understanding more and more about who we are now, who we have been, and who we must be. And that will help clarify that statement. I don't reject it, but I think that most of the time at this point, what you're calling wildest dreams of ancestors will really be their nightmare. So, last week at this celebration, last Sunday, a week ago, this coming Sunday, there was a celebration at the campus of Howard University for the life and the work of my friend and brother, Ba Cham. This is a celebration. And Ba was a beautiful brother from the Gambia, from a beautiful family. And there's support for the Mbai Babakar Cham Memorial Scholarship Fund. Those of you who want to give money to the scholarship fund, it's important. There's Mbai right there. Love this brother. We're getting ready to do a tribute to Ngugi wa Thiong'o, a couple of them at Sankofa. And we were talking yesterday, and Holly was like, we putting this panel together. Who should be on the panel? I said, the first name I thought of was Mbai. And then we just got quiet because Mbai and Haile and Shriek go back 40 years, 50 years now, because Mbai was on faculty at Howard for 45 years. A great artist, filmmaker, great scholar of film and culture and literature, African literature, a great friend and comrade, very central part of not only the Howard community, but most importantly, the African world community, a true human being, made transition. And at the celebration of his life, I was talking with the good sister Nubia Kai, Professor Nubia Kai, who is just flat-foot brilliant. We talked about her Monday night. Remember, y'all, in office hours, we were talking about her work around sacred historiography. And in talking to her, she was talking about how the way we think about ourselves as African people, and now I'm talking about in the context of ways of knowing and also governance. So we're using our conceptual categories here, Africana Studies conceptual categories, which again is the guideline to use a phrase that's bandied about to these days, a vocabulary word, the guardrails to help us focus. So all this stuff's coming at us. If we use our framework, we can be able to segment out how we should be asking questions so that we don't confuse things. So when we say, you know, well, the government, what are we going to do? And that's social structure conversation. Who are we to each other? Governance. We can act accordingly. Winsome Sears, who's running for governor of Virginia, is a person of African descent whose people came from the Afro-Caribbean. That's important in the governance formation. What she's talking, of course, is dead ass reckless and crazy. She's going to lose. The candidate she's running against, Spamberger, is not an ideal candidate in Virginia. And I'm saying that, you know, it's a problem. But guess what? In a governance formation, we must ask ourselves, what is the best option for us? You know, and I don't know, Prof, I know we've all been talking about this. The brother who is the candidate for Attorney General, Jay Jones, in the state of Virginia. Some texts were released, which have been held by those who wanted to deploy them at just the right time. That reveal he sent some texts about how the former Republican Virginia House Speaker Todd Gilbert, a nasty piece of work, but nobody should have any violence committed against them. So he had some texts which said, you know, suggested that that this guy be shot in the head. And the text, Jones texted somebody, says 3 people, 2 bullets, Gilbert, Hitler, and Paul Pot. Gilbert gets 2 bullets to the head. Yikes. Hey man, that's rough talk, bruh. In a text or in your mind. And then after a phone call, the guy texted back. He says, you were talking about Jennifer Gilbert's children would die. And then Jones answered, yeah, I've told you this before. Only when people feel pain personally do they move on policy. Man, that's, nah, you can't defend that. You can't defend that. You don't do that. However, the governor of Virginia, Glenn Youngkin, called for him to lead a race because he was leading the Republican. Now the polls say now he's not. He's trailing the Republican by a point or 2. But here's the thing. Glenn Youngkin, I know you ain't opened your mouth to talk about any kind of violence. Because this man sent text messages. You enact policy. And if y'all think somehow Winsome Sears, who is black, who is a person of African descent, if you think Winsome Sears is going to be a better governor because you said, well, y'all got to denounce this man. If you don't denounce him, we voting for Winsome Sears. Okay. Because she said something about attacks on cars or something like, you ain't going to have no car. The police going to stop and frisk your ass. They're going to tow your car. Don't be stupid. I'm saying the governance space in our framework allows us to debate and discuss within ourselves, but we don't confuse that with who we are to other people. Let's be crystal clear about that. And so this question of what our ancestors think and do and what we think they think or do is a question of narrative, and standing at biased tribute and biased celebration, talking with Nubia Carr says, you know, there are ways we need to think about our connection to each other across space and time that we generated for ourselves. And she talks about this at length in the book I'm about to show you. This book is about 340 pages. It's called Kuma Malinke Historiography. You see it there? Sundiata Keita to Alamani Samori Touré. She has talked to dozens and dozens and dozens of jollies, what the French call griots, over the arc of the last 30 years. And in gleaning that information from them, she says there are ways that we think about the past that are absolutely African, that are continent-wide, that we must use to think about who we are to each other, that are completely distinct from these Western ways that we fold ourselves into. And then this little book that she just published, this book came out this year. I want to say, let me see, it's copyright 2025. Yep. No, 2024, but it's called A River of Prophecy, Constructing a Sacred History of African Americans, Dr. Nubia Kai. I highly recommend this book. You can see, and thank you, Nubia, for on Monday night during office hours, as we were talking about her, someone found a talk that she gave on the Kumba Malinke historiography book at the Library of Congress. And if you want to retrieve that, somebody could probably put it in both the chats, the Mbangis here, as I'm talking, because I'm going to be ready to wind this up in a moment. Yeah, jumping out. Oh yeah, jumping out on ice still in New Jersey. Thank you all for these updates. But again, every week we're in community with each other. And so these in the chats, what you were seeing is real-time conversations that bring this together as a community. So in talking with her, I thought it was very important because I've been thinking about it now. So I mean, and having read both these pieces, I spent some time in the wee hours rereading Nubia on this question of how we connect to each other. It's a reminder we have to figure out how to clear our thinking and engage in both the best of what we have thought over time and space, and the best we have done over time and space, and see the connections. That's genealogy, the connections. And we also have to examine when and where and in what context we have made mistakes and figure out how to learn from them. That too is crystal clear. We must do that. And then we use the science and technology category, which we ask in our conceptual categories. That's the fourth category, right? Social structure, governance structure, then ways of knowing, and then science and technology, which is how do we interact with and use the built environment, the material environment, technology to advance what we are trying to do as humans in the world, and how have African people done that? We're using it in this moment to amplify these intimate conversations. The most enduring conversations are intimate. Ideally, this would be 1-on-1 or 3-on-3 or 5-on-5 or 25-on-25, sitting in Sankofa yesterday for hour after hour. A lot of my students came by. A lot of folks from community came by. We just sitting there talking and listening to each other. What Bunseki Fukiya would call Lufuki, the ability to breathe one's essence, to feel, to taste, smell, to be in that moment. That's ideal. But guess what? That's not to scale in a moment where the science and technology allows people to meet, to reach hundreds and thousands and millions of people. And this is not Club Shay Shay. This is not the easy, low-hanging fruit of the titillating back and forth that has some appeal because it allows us to escape from reality for a moment. But it is a place that has sustained itself, that has built itself, that started for me in some ways with a conversation with one cat who had enough money to say, let's go and uplink and upload the conversation, and continued with a sister who not only had the vision and a little bit of resources, but the capacity to build out. And here we are, 292 Saturdays after that, in a transformed world, having lived through a pandemic, who will probably live through another one. But the thing is built now. And because it is built, that momentum enables us to use the science and technology to amplify the intimate conversations like the one I had with Nubia Kai last Sunday, and then inform folk to go get this book, because this is what she says. She says, this essay is an attempt to clear, this is the small book, which kind of gives you a summary in some ways of the larger book. She says, this essay is an attempt to clear up one of the most confusing and erroneous accounts of African cultural history among African scholars: the African origins of the Judeo-Christian and Islamic traditions. This history has been obfuscated and reversed in Euro-Western scholarship, and African-American intellectuals who are still overwhelmingly dependent on this scholarship have unwittingly contributed to its school of errors. While there is acknowledgement that Christianity, Judaism, and Islam have African origins by most African scholars, there still seems to be an assumption that the early Christians, Hebrews, and Arabs were Caucasian or mixed race, not African. They are intellectually rendered as the other. What we are saying unequivocally is that the Judeo-Christian and Islamic traditions were originated and developed by Black Africans who were descendants of the ancient Cushitic Kemetic peoples. What we are calling the major Western religions are actually the major African religions. When comparing traditional African and Afro-diasporan accounts of history to modern standard discourses, what we have are two opposing views on the question of indigenous religions of Africa: the African traditional mythological view and the modern Western historical view. And she goes on to explain what she means by myth, which she says all cultures have. Now, there are going to be people who would disagree with what she just said. I encourage you then to read this. And if you're real ambitious, read this. I've seen 2 copies of this physical book in my life. The one I got in my hand and the one at the house of Kwaku Larry Crow and Mama Olabisi Olokolade in Dake. It's kind of expensive. But I get money, I buy books. So the point is that this is based on a lifetime of study, which still goes on. And she talks about talking to these mouth-to-ear historians whose memories speak to the capacity of the human brain to remember. People say, Dr. Carr, how you remember all that stuff? Because I'm constantly listening and in dialogue. Everyone can do what I'm doing, and better, and differently better. Absolutely. But we have so tethered ourselves to the type of intervening disruptions that cause us to diminish our capacity that it seems fantastical. And what Nubia is saying, I've sat with these elders over the arc of the last 40 years. When I asked them where they came from, they will tell they came from here. And then I asked, before that, where'd you come from? And they said, I came from here. And then they asked me, where did you come from before that? And she said, it all traces back to the same places in Africa. It is fascinating to hear her talk about this. In fact, let me just read a little bit more from the beginning here. She says, for example, in discussing the origins of the Wolof of Senegal, I would ask, what ethnic group did the Wolof descend from? The Jellies answered, they came from the Serere. Where did the Serere descend from? The Serere descended from the Sonike, Songhai Empire. The Soninke descended from the Sonin of Nubia. Over and over, the origins of ethnic groups in North, West, Central, East, and Southern Africa are traced back to the Nile Valley. It sounds fantastical, but then ask yourself, what have you seen to refute it? Oh, but everybody knows King Arthur and George III. Everybody knows the damn Queen of England and knows all about Prince Andrew on Epstein Island, or who's going to come and be the next King of England. Huh? In the hell we know that and wouldn't go talk to our own living memory, our jolly. So Ambassador Andrew Young was on campus this week. It was very interesting. Ambassador Young talking with young people. I wasn't able to get there. I encouraged my students to go, but they said, no, we want to be in class with you. Okay, so after class was over, we walked over to the auditorium. He was still there. Spent all this time talking with young people. Still, after the formal lecture was over, it was a beautiful thing to see. And I thought about what Harry Belafonte wrote in his memoir, My Life, which we mentioned last week. And where Harry Belafonte writes of being there at a discussion that Dr. King was having with his lieutenants after they had been in Newark with Amiri Baraka. And at one point, the thing got heated, and Dr. King said to Andrew Young, be quiet, Andy. I don't want to hear from you right now. The problem is you're a capitalist and I'm not. Now, would it have been appropriate for me to ask Ambassador Young that question in front of all them people? I think maybe so, but I also know that it would have been misinterpreted perhaps, because our governance formation isn't robust, and it wouldn't have been out of disrespect. It would have been about trying to understand, what is your thinking? What was your thinking? Not just then, but in all the years since then in the city of Atlanta, which is a beautiful testament to Black possibility and a brutal condemnation of the Negro petty bourgeois class as people are homeless right now in the city of Atlanta. I want to understand that, and I want to understand what your perspective of it is before you become an ancestor, because once you become an ancestor, our narratives seem to shrink considerably, and we put words into people's mouths. I thought about that, and now how that would not come up as a question and an answer because the elder wouldn't be asked it. I don't think he would be offended at all. The man, after all, is a minister. And so the idea of the gospel of Jesus Christ, which he talks about all the time, is there. I think that's what we have to do. Maybe at some point I'll ask him that question. But if you defeat our possibilities by shrinking the worldview down to saying, I'm not going to study, I'm not going to engage in it, that's why we have a problem. Going to be in the wind up here in a minute. You know, we're in the first week of the Supreme Court term, United States Supreme Court term. And it was interesting. The Supreme Court heard arguments in Childs versus Salazar on Tuesday. That is the Supreme Court case where this Colorado counselor wants to try to engage in conversion therapy with a young person. In other words, you say this is your gender. I'm going to try to convince you it's not, because I want you to show up the way that you came out your mama's womb, and I'm attributing a gender to your sex, and I want to have gender convert. And so the state of Colorado is like, no, people should be protected from your worldview if they don't want it. Well, Supreme Court looks like, they have their white nationalists, white nativists. I won't call them conservatives because they're not conservatives. They're white nativists, including the blackface white nativist Clarence Thomas. They look like, if you listen to the oral arguments, they look like they may be predisposed to say, no, you can do that, and you can do it on First Amendment grounds. That's their favorite amendment when it comes to their speech, just not to your speech. In other words, you can say something they don't like, and they can say, we're going to send the police. They can say whatever the hell they want. Oh, no, you're not a boy, you're a girl. You're not a girl, you're a boy. And be protected speech. Now, it's very interesting because we also saw in Boston, the district court judge last week, William Young, got a handwritten note on June 19th, on Juneteenth, problem. We were all in Galveston. He got a note in his chambers from some anonymous person that said, Trump has pardons and tanks. What do you have? Well, on the 30th of September, Judge Young, while issuing an injunction, 160 page opinion, which said that doggone Kristi Noem and Marco Rubio misused their authority when they targeted non-citizens who were protesting to stop the killing in Gaza for deportation because of their First Amendment protections. They have First Amendment protections. Everybody has that. Don't think that your speech has been curbed and limited because you don't have a passport or you don't have citizenship. And so the judge said, no, Rubio, no doggone Kristi Noem. Now people saying the law don't matter if they don't enforce the law. And that's true and not true at the same time. We won't go into that today. We've talked about that many times before. But why I'm bringing this case up is not only because of the pushback at the district court level, and in a minute I'm going to mention another article I was reading in today's New York Times, but because of how Judge William Young begins his 161-page opinion. He says, I got this note, and it said, Trump has pardons and tanks. What do you have? So the judge in the opinion starts with the handwritten note and then gives his answer, written answer as part of the opinion. Dear Mr. or Mrs. Anonymous, alone I have nothing but my sense of duty. Together, we the people of the United States, you and me, have our magnificent Constitution. Here's how that works out in a specific case. And then he proceeds to eviscerate a little sycophant named Marco Rubio, whose people in Cuba would probably be like Venezuela's Machado in Venezuela. But guess what? I'm not going to pretend as if you all are upholding what you call the rule of law. I can read apparently better than you can. And doggone Christy Nome, my little friend, with your cosplay soldier outfits, and you're protected behind a bank of your sycophants? Nah, I'm not going to do that. And so, and it was very interesting. There's an article in today's Times, judges concerned about Supreme Court of the United States emergency orders. The New York Times has interviewed apparently dozens of judges, most of whom didn't go on the record, to talk about the fact that they are concerned about the Supreme Court using this rocket docket, this shadow docket, not briefing cases, just saying, well, until we get to the merits, we're going to let this fool do whatever he wants, which is why the boy Stephen Miller froze up because he got over his skis and he's plenary power. Man, shut up. They're going to break it, though. Y'all shouldn't be completely worried. Now, let me kind of wind this to a close today, because this was the first week of the Supreme Court term. And, you know, there's a lot going on. There's a lot of stuff. But again, anchoring ourselves in who we are to each other, exploring our memories, thinking about what our ancestors were and did, and thinking about what we're doing and connecting those two, that is how we move ourselves through. And we have to confront and face the fact that it's going to require some slowing down, some pausing, and some thinking together. There was a report on the front page of the New York Times this week about Harvard. Some faculty, 7-member faculty group got together to talk about study habits at Harvard. And I pulled up the actual article. This is Anamona Hartokalis writing in the New York Times a couple of days ago under the headline, Harvard students skip class and still get high grades, faculty say. Many students don't do the reading, don't speak up in class. According to a report, now professors are trying to change a campus culture they say hurts achievement and stifles speech. It says once these Harvard students get in, it's a difficult place to get in. 97% of people who apply don't get in. Many of its students skip class and fail to do the reading. According to the Classroom Social Compact Committee, 7 faculty member group, when they do show up for class, they're focused on their devices and are reluctant to speak. Sometimes it is because they are afraid of sharing ideas that others will disagree with, but often they have not read enough of the homework to make a meaningful contribution. Absolutely. Again, in Nubia, when we talk about it, and this week, we're going to get into continue framing question 3. We're reading Cedric Robinson's book, Black Movements of America, focusing on chapter 1, which we began last week. We'll continue this week. Any study group, no matter how huge, and in the case of Nubia, we're talking about thousands of people, or small, but I mean you and one other person, every study group is enhanced by doing the homework. What Asa here you're saying, African power, we talked about it a couple of weeks ago, is nothing more pitiful to be led by people who didn't do their homework. You know, but my point is that we have to remember that we're going to have to slow down and do some work, because what these students have mastered is the shift in learning, asynchronous learning. Watch a video, take a test. Recorded classes, Chat GPT writing all the newspapers, writing all the papers, getting the group meeting, get all the answers, and boom, 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 boom. They've adapted to the appearance of achievement. This is a condemnation of the social structure that did it, not of the human beings who are in that structure. So what we have to do is continue to pour the clean glasses of water and remind people that our capacity to learn and to be collectively relies on our capacity to slow ourselves down individually. We put this in the context of these fascists who are currently in charge of the legislative branch and the executive branch and some of the judicial branch. These judges are pushing back of the U.S. federal government. This week, they announced a quote unquote compact. It's on the front page of today's New York Times. This compact Now what they're doing, again, this is Kevin Roberts, this is Russell Vogt, this is Project 2025 boys. They're saying, now Bozo has sent out a memo that says that universities can sign this compact to agree to align themselves with this federal government, this executive branch, these white nativists, these fascists worldview. And if they don't sign onto the compact, they elect to forego federal benefits. So your tax dollars and mine that would go to them normally for student loans, for grants, for federal contracts, for research funding, all that. They say, if you don't sign this compact, you don't get none of that. That's my money, bozo. And so as a result, we have to remind ourselves that there are more of us than them. So like, the Judge Young said, by myself, I ain't got nothing but my convictions, my sentiments, but together we have more than that. What we have done here online is establish a rhythm and a foundation for learning week after week, day after day, where we place these contemporary events in a long view historical memory, and that gives us a conversation we can sustain very differently. I had that conversation yesterday with some of my students who are in my physical classes at Howard, and I'm so excited because the convening this week, and this is where I'm going to come in for a landing, were a couple of places I was in this week, which I thought really just kind of brought this open for me very differently. A shout out to my man Bruce Jenkins, cousin Bruce Jenkins, who runs a program at Calvin Coolidge High School here in the District of Columbia. And on Monday afternoon, spent several hours with Bruce, some of his comrades from different walks of life, 2 barbers who were doing free haircuts, and about 40 young brothers in the library at Calvin Coolidge. Just a conversation about whatever they wanted to talk about. And I thought it was exceptional being in this conversation. And I want to thank Bruce for inviting me to be in it and for inviting me to be in it ongoing, because it's an ongoing thing. And in that conversation, the young men shared a lot. We all shared a lot in that circle. And one thing that I didn't hear except one time, and I'll talk about that, and it was in passing, was a discussion of study habits. This has been completely displaced by conversations about living from day to day. This is a radical shortening of perceptions of space and time. These young brothers, I was so impressed. People say respectful. There's a protocol. They observed the protocol. It was clear to me how, because Bruce has been in conversation with these young brothers, and their ways of knowing are not ways of knowing they learned at school. They brought that from the neighborhood. Respect gives respect to respect. We're Africans. I don't care what the context is. You see that shine through. It's very important. What did shine through is in terms of that governance formation, how we treat each other, and the other conceptual categories, ways of knowing, cultural meaning making. They were all fly, they were all cool, you know what I'm saying? Especially when the coaches and athletes started talking, that respect really engendered. Let me know that it is the context that shapes how we apply our cultural meaning making, how we connect our movement and memory. What was missing was the introspection that is the child of study. What was missing was the contemplation, the underlying ideas, not because they don't have the capacity. Clearly they do, with some brilliant things said, but what's too often missing is that value added of deepening our memory. That's what age should give. So we should be in that room helping them connect things they know to things they don't know. If you read Aikwe Arma's book, The Healers, we understand what that looks like when it's done well and what it looks like when people try to manipulate you. Professors don't have respect because they're professors. They shouldn't. They have respect because they know some things and they want you to know what they know and more. And so in that circle, one of the things I asked them about was, I said, when I was coming in the building, I saw a statue in front of y'all building. There's a couple of Coolidge grads who were among the adults who were speaking. And I said, there's a statue out there of a black boy holding a book in his hand like this. I said, y'all ever notice what was the title of that book? Silence. And then one of the young men in the back put his hand up and said, yeah, it's about a biography of Malcolm X. I wanted to cry. You paid attention. The statue is bronze, by the way. The statue is bronze. It was done by, and thank you all who let me know on Monday night, because I didn't know who the sculptors were at that time, and I put it out. And thanks for everybody who texted in and said, and he put in that the sculptor is Wesley Clark, a good brother. I then looked up Wesley Clark. He has a website, wesleyclarkart.com. Look for his statue called, it's a public work, he was commissioned to do it, 2020, called The Optimist, the Believer, the Achiever. It's a black boy with a backpack. In his hand, he got the autobiography of Malcolm X. You can see it written on the back, although it's bronze. Everything's bronze. And I told him, I said, good job. And I said, then I went around the back of the statue because it's got a little bush around it and some grass, but I stepped over the bush, went around. Let me look in the back. I see, got a backpack on, and in the backpack is 2 books that this man has sculpted. One of them is Octavia Butler, Wild Seed, and the other is Frantz Fanon, The Wretched of the Earth. So look at Wesley Clark. If y'all go to his website, you see this is his thing, man. He's a cultural meaning maker who's also pouring in movement and memory. He is in the vein of the good brother Rodney Leon, who did the New York African Burial Ground Monument. He is in the vein of those who constructed the memorial at the Richmond African Burial Ground. He is in the vein of those Africans we've talked about before. The sculptor Ed Dwight, the great astronaut sculptor who did the beautiful, magnificent carvings on the State House grounds in Columbia, South Carolina, of the journey of African people. So I'm so happy to say, but in that conversation, I'm asking y'all pass that every day. And the faculty at Coolidge didn't know. And it just made me think we have to slow down, because this is what deepens the contemplation. Then the next thing I ask these young boys is, what y'all then got to understand is, you know the autobiography of Malcolm X, you at least heard of it, you should read it. And also find out who Octavia Butler is and who Frantz Fanon is. And in fact, I'm thinking now, Wesley Clark's still around. He in DC. Somebody should reach out to him and maybe bring him to campus. And maybe I'll talk to them about that. I'll talk to Bruce about that. Bring in Wesley Clark so he can talk about the statue to the whole student body and why he did that. And then we start reading the book, and we are in Nubia. And of course, somebody raised the question. One of the young boys, he was talking to one of the barbers. He said, I want to be a barber. So the barber said, hey, man, you know they got a program at Roosevelt High School. He said, nah. He said, the counselor told me that, they didn't have no programs nowhere. He said, no, they absolutely do. You should check into it. So Monday night I mentioned it, and our sister, our good sister, Dr. Courtney, who is the principal at Roosevelt High School, said, yeah, we got that program. That's what I'm talking about. So I text Bruce, hey man, this is all you got to do. She sent the link. My point is that community, the man want to be a barber. He should be a barber while he cutting hair. He could talk about Frantz Fanon too. Why? Because at least now we got a point of entry. And here we are with thousands of people all over the world in a regular conversation. And everybody now knows, there are people now who didn't know the name Wesley Clark. Like I didn't know it. And then I run around the corner, because when they redid Coolidge, they added a wing, and that's the Ida Bell Wells Middle School, which is across the street from another middle school here in DC, Northwest DC. Tacoma neighborhood. So I saw the statue there. They got a statue of Ida B. Wells out there by Ikwe Hoppin, The Light of Truth, with the quote from her on how you get rid of ignorance with the light of truth and oppression. Those students and adults pass those statues every day, but the contemplation isn't there. To many of them, it's just inanimate objects, cultural meaning making disconnected from movement and memory. And this is what we experience everywhere. We took those students from Howard University in the freshman seminar to the New York African Burial Ground year after year, all of them for this reason. We want you to see these ancestors who symbolize all the ancestors, including all of your ancestors. And we want you to see what happens when people come together and say, not here. We will have our movement and memory here. Our cultural meaning making will be here, because then our governance formation, this is not how you treat people. And our ways of knowing, this is not how you treat your ancestors. And this is what we expect of historically Black colleges and universities. And so I would tell them every year, you are heir to this, and it's your responsibility projected into the future. It makes me sad to know that we're not doing that anymore. But guess what? We have been jailbroken now. We can do it as many times as we want with as many people as we want. What's missing? The rites of passage, which we see now projected forth into the Nubia space. Thank you, Baba Motosho. Shaping experience to expectation, life purpose, bisected by social structure objectives, bisected by all this noise and confusion and attempt to scare and intimidate people. We stitch it back together. In fact, as Nubia Kai ends this little book, A River of Prophecy, which isn't even 100 pages. In fact, it's 51 pages of text. No, actually, yeah, not even 51 pages. It's 42 pages. This is what she says. She says, from the early Christian empire of Ghana, Ouagadougou, a karmic history of Black people is explained in this beautiful epic narrative, the Dausi. Again, it is a fragment of a much longer narrative that may still exist in the orature of the Jeseru, or perhaps in the texts of the little-known Soniki script. This small portion of the narrative, nevertheless, captures millennia of history's message. To know thyself means to know the good, the bad, and the ugly. so that we can connect with what is bad, amplify what is good, and make beautiful what is ugly. Ultimately, the Dauzi predicts a future that the forces of history have tailor-made for us. The African race is still divided by discord. Our next stage of empowerment will arise from that discord into a global Black unity through our collective strength of heart. For now, we are divided into 1,000 pieces of a patch quilt, and know that we must learn how to sew. There it is. That's the answer. We got all the stuff, but we must learn how to sew. To learn how to sew means acquiring the skills, the study, the thinking, but then to know what to do and how to sew together, that's the work of community building. I had a conversation. This is where I want to stop because I just want to mention this. I had a conversation. Shout out to Bishop Walker and his students and the faculty who came to the Black University class this past week on Howard's campus. Invited them to come. They come every year, and he brought a class of about 30 students. There were 2 or 3 students of African descent. Rest of those students were mostly European descent, a few Latinos, mostly white kids. And he teaches the African American Studies course at the Field School here in Washington, D.C. And they came in as we were studying W.E.B. Du Bois's 1935 essay, Does the Negro Need Separate Schools, in the Journal of Negro Education. And you want to talk about a different kind of conversation, a beautiful conversation, a conversation that glimpses the possibilities of how human beings can come into conversation, in a conversation led by, grounded in a genealogy of African memory by students of African descent. Everything emerged. Funding inequalities. What happens when we talk about cultural shift in curriculum? What happens when you have indoctrination? And these white kids who had prepared to come to this class, not by reading that assignment, but by continuing what they had been reading, including Du Bois, including Angela Davis and Bell Hooks. Man, I watched those young people for an hour and a half grapple with questions of whiteness that they had never had to grapple with before in a candid and honest way that I thought was truly transformational and remarkable. And I saw my students in that class grapple as they are researching, because their job now is to do their individual projects and then come together around the historically Black colleges. We were talking about Winston-Salem State, Lincoln University of Missouri, Paul Quinn, Alabama A&M, Cheney State, the Institute for Colored Youth as they came from. And these white students and these couple of Black students are now being exposed to something that they had never seen before in real time. And in that conversation, and thank you to Bobby Lovett and Jelani Favors, who wrote the books that we also discussed this week. And by the way, that Black University class, this is the percolation in anticipation of the class we're going to offer worldwide on the Black University. So keep dropping in the names of those historically Black colleges, those historically Black high schools. Those are kind of level set points that we're using for the young people to begin to think about, and not just the young people ultimately, but the conversation we had Monday night in office hours with Davin, and Davin exploring the possible linguistic connections between the concept of the Ori out of the Yoruba and the concept of her, not as face, but as head in ancient Egypt, consistent with what Nubia Kai is talking about in terms of thinking differently about these connections. That conversation we had in Nubia is not presaged by $60-some thousand a year tuition. It is not confined, as we see here with the YouTube dimension that we have globally. It is not confined to anything other than our capacity to sit still and think and contemplate and share. Ultimately, that's where we have to go. We got to learn how to sew. We got to learn how to stitch it together. And we got to learn where the pieces fit. And we're fully capable of doing both. That, to me, would be our ancestors' wildest dream.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah.
I don't know if there's
I don't know if
there is a feedback. I don't know why.
I don't know why. Oh, my bad. I'm gonna mute myself.
There was a question in the YouTube chat about coming into Knarrative and if they have a learning disability. And I was thinking about how, when you talk about jailbreaking the university, the way, you teach, but it's also the way we learn doesn't exist really in our classrooms, right? And we've been so conditioned to learn in rows with somebody talking at you without, the beauty of the Nubia chat is that there's constant, conversation and discussion around what is being said, and people are engaging in real time. You can't do that in a regular classroom. Teacher would say that's disruptive. You know, you got to listen to me and be quiet, and then we're going to test you. But there's constant that, and if what's a learning disability in this environment, and it made me really think about how brilliant it is that what you're doing. So I'll be quiet. So thank you.
No, that's a beautiful. Thank you, Prof. And thank you for whoever asked that. And I agree. They're saying Jermaine puts a lot of stuff into Nubia. I mean, he's definitely doing it. Thank you, Jermaine, for that work. And for everybody, like you say, in Nubia, the conversation is different. I mean, like I say, it's that we, like you say, curated that beautifully. That question and the way you answered it is so powerful, because that's the demonstration in our framework. Learning disability depends on context. I mean, the fact that anyone would feel comfortable enough to say that is evidence that there isn't a lack of ability. It's a different type of ability, because people say, well, I have a learning disability. Say that again. I have a learning disability. Okay. Did I understand what you're saying? Yeah. Okay. So we're having a conversation, right? Yeah. So therefore, do you feel disabled in terms of me asking you what you just said? No. Okay. So the first thing we need to do in a governance formation is level set on what we're defining as a disability, because it seems like we ain't got no disability communicating with each other. And all learning is receiving and giving in conversation. What this structure has done is try to set up a hierarchy. We talked about this, y'all. Remember when we talked about that science and technology category? Jacob Carruthers says what the West does is set up hierarchies. They disassemble you as a whole thing, carve you into categories, and then rank the categories. You have a learning disability. Why? Because I gave you a certain task that I conceived of. You didn't do what I expect you to do, so I am ranking you here. Okay, this is what I'm gonna do. What? First of all, I'm not taking your test. That's Asa Hill here. Second of all, we're gonna have a conversation. And third of all, we're gonna close the gap between what you know right now and what you're capable of knowing. Well, no, those are the rules. Oh, you don't want those rules, because what it's going to reveal is this was never about education. It was always about power. So if you say you got a learning disability, do not accept that. Clearly, you ain't got one right now. So if you ain't got one right now, you ain't never going to have one in the conversation we have. So that's what I would thank you, Prof. That was,
That's it. And I can't thank you enough. This engagement that we are embarking upon. And thank you for Wesley Clark, because I just reached out to him. I was like, this art is fire. Hopefully he'll come through. But yeah, this is it. This is everything. And I can't thank you enough.
Thank you, Prof. See, that young man doing that work, and now he gonna reach back, and now the world gonna know that's how we win. I'm gonna stop right there. Thank you, Prof. That's beautiful. You made my weekend. That's beautiful. Love you all.
Love you too.
See you later.